here we are in our class on Scratch, and you'll notice that I have two studios here. One is called our second Scratch project, and it looks like somebody, good job Hunter, has already created a project for today. So that is where you're going to be uploading your file, and I'll show you at the end how you can share your project into our Scratch studio as well. But anyway, we're going to start with a brand new project here. We're going to click on Create, and it's going to open up a brand new blank project window for us. And we have our default cat sprite and totally empty code view window so that we can then start creating. So I'm going to first of all get rid of this sprite here. We're going to create everything from scratch. There's nothing in our project yet, just a plain white background. And I'm going to just keep it pretty straightforward here. You can certainly add a different backdrop. You can create some of your sprites any way you want, but I'm going to keep it fairly basic. So first thing we're going to do is, I know when we play Pong, there are just a handful of things that we need to create. Obviously, there's a ball. There are two paddles. And we're actually going to create different sprites to kind of announce who wins. So when player one, is successful in winning the round, it's going to pop up a message that says player one wins, and then one for player two as well. So we're going to create a total of 5 sprites, and then we're going to give code to each of those sprites so it knows what to do as the game progresses. So I'm going to first start off by going down to choose a sprite and go to the paint option, which gives us this window to develop different costumes. So it's going to create a sprite that we basically create on our own. So I'm going to just start with creating our ball. So I'm going to select a circle. And just like in Photoshop and everything, I'm going to click and drag. But as I drag, I'm going to hold down Shift. And that's going to keep it in those proportions of a circle as opposed to an oval. So Shift will do that. I'm going to change my colors here. I'm going to get rid of the outline. So I'm going to switch to none for the outline. And for the color, let's make it some sort of, maybe a blue color, maybe dark blue. Doesn't matter. I'm just going to make it a nice blue color. And I'm going to switch to my arrow key, or my arrow tool. I'm going to zoom in, and then as I click, you'll see it reveals where that center point is for our stage. So, and I can see the crosshairs at the middle of our circle, and I'm going to line those right up. Now, the reason for that is so that as we control our movement of this ball, all that movement is going to be contained and constrained to the center of the ball as opposed to somewhere like out here. And so I have a little more control and accuracy with the movements. I'm going to zoom out a little bit again. Now, I think that ball is okay, but I'm going to make it just a little bit smaller. I'm going to just click and drag down. So we have a slightly smaller ball, and I'm going to just click and move it into position one more time. And that's a much better size for what we're doing. So I'm going to switch it to, instead of saying sprite one, I'm just going to call it ball. This gives us its exact position. I'm going to just put it right in the center. So we have our sprite. We named it ball. Keeps us organized. We want to make sure that everything is named in a way that's logical. And so we know what it is based on the name and what it looks like, as opposed to just showing a picture and relying on knowing which one is which. So we have our ball. We're going to create one more sprite that is going to be one of the paddles that slides up and down in the game. So I'm going to just grab a rectangle and give this a different color. I don't know, let's go with red, like a nice dark red, medium red, something like that. And I'm going to make it, just kind of a line, kind of like that. Once again, going to zoom in and reposition it so that it lines up right in the center. So our movements are accurate. We'll zoom out just a little bit, and then I'm just going to put it over here so I know that this is player one. So we're going to change the name. It's player one. And I'm actually going to duplicate this. Instead of going through that whole thing again to make player two, I'm just going to right click, choose duplicate. It actually automatically changes it to player two. I'll just move it over here. So they're roughly the same position apart. So that's at 212. This one's at, let's go minus 212 there. So they're evenly spaced. Okay. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna create another sprite. And this one's gonna be a text-based one. Really, there's nothing to it. It's just, any sprite can contain any number of these tools. It's just all that's gonna be on this one is gonna be text. So I'm gonna select it. I'm gonna use, maybe a pixel font on there, and we're gonna just call it player one wins, and select all my text. I'm just gonna make it black. Now there's no font size options in here, but you can just drag a corner and resize it that way. So make a nice big player one wins and center that. Call it player one wins. And I'm gonna duplicate this one as well. This one's gonna be called player two wins. And I'll go in and change here. So right now we're just building our sprites. We're building the sprites. We're making sure we have all the pieces we need so that when we create our game, all we have to do now is focus on just the code. We don't have to focus on what pieces are missing and what we need to do to get it all to work together and start adding stuff. We try and over prepare is what the name of the game is. Try and get it to look everything to look right at first, so you can then focus on getting things to work at the same time. Last thing I'm going to do though, before we get into the code, is I'm going to select our text sprites here, and I'm going to put them into the directly in the center. Just change our coordinate values to 0, 0. There we go. That way they're already positioned where we want them to be. Okay, so we're done making all of our sprites, and so we can get out of this costumes tab and go right into the code. Now, there are a few things that we can do here. Every one of these sprites is going to have a little bit of code in each of them. The ball is actually going to contain the most. So I'm going to save that one till last so we can focus on the ball, because that's where really the game happens, is with that ball. So first thing, I'm going to grab player one. And when you're playing Pong, the paddles only move up and down. And so in order to have them move up and down, we need to figure out what's going to control that. And so we have two paddles. We have to have two different ways of controlling them. And so for player one, I'm going to set it up so that it's controlled by my mouse movement. And player two is going to be controlled by the arrow keys. So what we're going to do is, with player one, we're going to come over here to all of our code. This whole left-hand column here is all the different pieces of code we can start with. And we're going to create an event. And so basically when something happens, it kind of starts things off. So when the flag is clicked, which is this one right here, it basically starts the game. So basically this is just saying when the game is started, what we want is to make sure that the movement of this sprite right here is controlled by the mouse. So we want to make sure that it kind of starts off in a specific location. And so we're going to go to motion, and we're going to have it go to a specific spot. And right now, it's not too bad, because we already set the position for the X, which is left and right, to minus 112. And this one, or 212 rather, and this one is positive 212. So those are in good X positions already. And we want to start right in the middle. So we'll have that start at 0 as well. Now the difference is as we go, this paddle is going to follow our mouse. So if I'm touching here to start, then that means the paddle is going to start at the top. So really setting the Y position doesn't mean anything. But we set the X position just to ensure that at the start of the game, that is going to be in the proper location. So now, for the duration of the game, we want this paddle to be able to move for the whole time based on where our mouse is. So what I'm going to do is go over to control, because obviously we're going to control something. And for the duration of the game, we want to have a forever loop, which basically means that everything that happens inside of this piece is going to be true and happening over and over again constantly for the length of the game. And so inside the forever loop, we're going to tell it to basically take whatever the Y position is of your mouse, which is how far up and down it is. Doesn't matter left and right at all, but however high our mouse is, that is going to be controlled, controlling this paddle. So since we're talking about motion, we're going to go up to motion, and we're going to set the Y, which is right here. So set Y, which is vertical motion, and we're not going to set it to a specific, number here. We want to really set it to what our mouse is doing. And so to do that, we need Scratch to kind of look around and be aware of what the computer is doing right now. And so to do that, we go to sensing, and it takes us to another category of code. And so what we're looking at here is the mouse Y. So it's the Y position of the mouse. We click and drag that over, and when you see that input get kind of a border around it, that means that we can just let go and it drops the mouse Y into there. And surprisingly, this is all the code we need to control this paddle. And this is all we need to do for this paddle for the whole game. So I'm going to click go, and you'll notice that now as I move my mouse, we are now in control of that paddle. And I can move it around as fast as I want. I can, go as slow as I want, and that's going to help me to control my side of the game as player one. Notice I can go left and right with my mouse all I want, and it's not moving it left and right. It's only moving it up and down depending on where my mouse is. And it's the center of that paddle is moving along with the mouse. So that gives me a lot of control to be able to play with player one. So now we move on to player two. Now we have a different paddle. We can't obviously control this one with the mouse at the same time. Otherwise, you'd be essentially playing the game by yourself, and they'd both just be moving up and down at the same time, and that's no fun. You want to play against somebody. So we'll start off the same way. We'll create an event. So once the game starts, or when that flag is clicked, we want to set the position of this. And so we want this one to start right here in the center the whole time. So we'll do the same thing. Go to motion. We're going to go to, and we're going to set this at 212, which is left and right in that position. But we're going to have it start at 0. So perfectly centered vertically on the page. So if we do that, watch what happens. It's up a little bit from center. I'm going to hit the flag, just drops down a little bit. Now, if I hit the flag again, nothing's going to happen because it's already moved and we haven't set up the controls yet. So that's not going to move one bit at this point. So just like we did with player one, we want to set the controls so that for the whole length of the game, the controls we press are going to control the movement. So we're going to go to control and grab a forever loop. And now anything within here is going to be true for the entire time. You can even see it has this little arrow here, which means that once it goes down the code, it's going to jump all the way back to the top and just kind of in a loop, it's going to circle back around and run through the same rules. Now, the difference here is since we're going to be using our arrow keys, we have to basically say, okay, well, if the up arrow key is pressed, then we want to move our paddle up. And if the down arrow key is pressed, then we want to move the paddle down. So this is where those conditional statements come in. So we find an if-then loop, or an if-then statement, and we drop it right in the middle. So if something happens, then whatever happens in here is what's supposed to happen. So what we said was if we want to move it up, we want to use the arrow key to control that. So we use sensing again. So basically, if you are pressing a certain key, so if key is pressed, we'll put that right in here. And you can choose from the drop down that we have our up arrow. So if the up arrow is pressed, then what's going to happen? We want it to move up. So movement, we go to motion, and we want to change the Y. So we're basically making it just the vertical movement up or down by that much. Now, if we want to move up, we use a positive number. If we want to move down, we use a negative number. So 10 is fine if we want to do that. However, if we want the movement to be faster, because the mouse can certainly move pretty fast, why don't we have our paddle move pretty fast? Let's change that to maybe 30. And then we do basically the same thing, except we're going to change it to for the down arrow. And instead of writing this whole thing again, piecing it together, we can right click on the if statement and choose duplicate. And it gives us a copy. And we can place it directly below the other if statement, but still within the forever loop. We don't want to put it down here somewhere. We want to put it right underneath. And we're going to change it from up arrow to down arrow and change it to minus 30, because negative numbers go down. And that's the code for the paddle. So we're going to stop our game and restart it so we can control left with our mouse. And I'm using my arrow keys to go up and down for that. So now we can really have some interactivity, and you can have two people playing at the same time independently of each other. So it makes the whole game a little bit more interactive and a little bit more organic in how it's played too, which is kind of cool. So I'm going to stop there. Next, we have these other two sprites, and these are going to be fairly straightforward to do. I'm going to choose player 1 wins first. And so the goal here is that when the game starts, we don't want to see these words on our stage. We just want to have them invisible until somebody actually wins. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an event so that when the game starts, we're going to basically have it be invisible. And so to do that, we go into where it says looks. And looks has anything to do with the appearance of anything, any of your sprites. So if you go all the way down to the bottom, you can see there's show and hide. So if we click hide, that means once the game starts, it kind of clears it out. That is no longer going to be visible. And we're going to create a show as well. So I'm just going to drag it over so that we have it. So when the game starts, it's going to hide. And then when something else happens, it's going to show it. So basically when player 1 wins, it's going to show player 1 wins. But how do we do that? What do we need to do? Well, if you remember back when we were talking about reset buttons, when we did that Ed puzzle was it last week? Basically what that did was it used something called an event that is a broadcast. And so when something happened, like when you click that circle, it broadcast a message that was then received by other objects, right? So we're going to click on a receive. When I receive a message, it's going to show. And the message it's going to receive is something that we have to create. So we're going to create a message that says player 1 has won. And then we'll have something else with the ball that will broadcast that, so that when the ball passes by on this side, it's going to say, oh, it hit the wall over here, so that means player 1 has won. It will receive that, and then player 1 wins will show up there. So you'll see, notice it's a little messy right now because there's two messages. But when I press the go button, notice it made player 1 wins disappear. And so it will not show up until the ball ends up going over here, but we haven't even told it to do that yet. So that's all the code we need for player 1 wins. We're going to create the same code for player 2 wins. So we're going to select player 2. We're going to know that it's when the flag is clicked and when it receives a message. Those are 2 different events that are going to happen. And under looks, we're going to hide it at the beginning and show it when the message is received. But we want it to show when a different message is received. So we'll create a new one. Player 2 has won. There we go. So now this is listening for this message to show up in order to show this particular notification. So I hit go, it's hidden right at the beginning, and now it won't show up at all until this this player over here is able to hit the ball past the left-hand side. Okay, so that was the more straightforward stuff. To be honest, it's not that what we're going to be doing next is difficult, but it's it's just got a little bit more to it, because the ball is actually what controls most of the action in this game. The paddles are only there to control the vertical movement of the code's only there to control the vertical movement. The ball itself needs to move, and we need to have the ball interact with various objects so it can bounce around. And then we have to tell it what to do if the ball gets past either one of the players. So let's get into the ball. So first thing, what happens when our game starts? That's always first. So on the event of when the flag is clicked, so when the game starts, what do we want to do? Well, depending on how much you've played the game, the ball could be off to the side somewhere from the previous round. And so when the game starts, we want to always start in the middle. You want some consistency so that it's a fair game as much as possible. So at the beginning, we want to put our ball right at the center. So we go to motion, and we want to go to 0, 0. And you can set those to whatever you want. It may not say 0, 0 to start with. It may take whatever the position is. So if I had this up here or over here, somewhere there, it might take these coordinates by default in there. But you can set it to anything you want. So when I hit play, it goes straight to the center. So it kind of restarts for us. Now, the next thing I'm going to add in here is what's called a wait. We don't want, like, once you hit start, everything's going to just start moving around. You don't want that ball to immediately be moving. So what we're going to do is we're going to have it wait a second and then start moving. So it gives everybody a chance to kind of be like, okay, we're starting. Let's focus on what needs to happen, and then the game will begin. So once it's clicked, it goes immediately to that center position, and we're going to have it wait. So we're going to control it. We're going to say wait 1 second. So now nothing's going to happen for 1 full second, and then we'll have it start acting the way it should. Now, when you want it to move, there are a couple different ways to do that. But most of the time, you'd say, move to the right so many pixels or move to the left so many. And that can get predictable, because what do we do? Do we say it always goes to the right first or always to the left first? That would get too predictable. Wouldn't add any challenge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it randomly select a different angle to start from. And so I'm going to go up to motion, and I'm going to have it turn to the right a certain number of degrees each time. Now, right here it's set to 15, so that's not too predictable. You can always guess that it's going to start moving in this direction first. But we can start adding some variation in there by using what are called operators. And operators are basically ways to compare or to change a value in some way. And so in this case, I can use this cool one right here that says pick random. And pick random basically means that we can put in different degrees in here and have it choose some random number in between a range, and then it will turn our circle or our ball a different direction to start every time. So it won't be the same each time. So I'm going to grab this and put it right in here where it says 15 degrees. And so we're going to turn to the right a random number between these two ranges, number of degrees. And so I'm going to give it a big number in both directions so that we have a very large range. So I'm going to do minus 180 degrees and positive 180 degrees. So really that gives us a huge range of directions that this could go. So if I hit start, nothing is happening yet, but what it's done is it has reoriented this circle so that it's now pointing a different direction that I don't know what it is. So it's giving us some variation, and that's going to make things more interesting. So the remaining steps are all going to happen within a forever loop again. So we're going to go to control, and we're going to grab a forever loop. So everything that is going to happen next is stuff that's going to keep happening for the duration of the game. So we use a forever loop for that. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, we want the ball to move all the time. So we're going to have it move 10 steps. It's always going to be moving about 10 steps at a time. The bigger this number is, the faster it's going to move. So if we set it to 20 or 30 or whatever, it's going to control the speed. So if we watch, I know something's not going to quite work, but we're going to see what happens here anyway. Going to hit the flag to start. It's turned, and now it's moving in a different direction. But then nothing happens. It just went straight down into the corner, and it's basically gone. So let's try it again. Goes back to the center, waits a second, moved in a different direction. Now it's hit the bottom, and it's moving all the way over to the right at 10 steps at a time until it's kind of stuck there. So that doesn't help us much. It gets us moving, but that's not how Pong is played. It's supposed to bounce all around, right? So one of the cool things about Scratch is it knows that bouncing should be an option. And so way down here at the bottom of motion, there's an option that says if on edge, bounce. And so we're going to set that up right there. You can go on either side, but we want to just make sure that if it ever hits an edge, it's going to bounce off of that edge. And so I'm going to just play again, and you'll see it picks a new direction, and it's just going to start bouncing off of whatever it runs into. Notice, though, it's traveling right through those paddles. Basically, we haven't told it to do anything different. You know, the paddles essentially are just on a different layer at this point, and they mean nothing to the ball. There's no interactivity at all. If I can move up and down, you know, nothing's going to happen. It's coming over this way, so I can move over here. But again, you'll see, nope, doesn't even care. So we have to tell the ball to do something when it comes in contact with another interactive piece. So let's see. We're going to add some control. We're going to add another if statement right underneath, still within the forever loop. And so we're going to say, well, if the ball comes in contact with player one, the left-hand paddle, then we want it to kind of change its direction and keep moving, right? So let's do that. So if we go to sensing, because we want to see when this ball is coming in contact with the paddle, we go, if it's touching something, so if it's touching what? It's like, well, it knows our sprites. So we're going to say if it comes in contact and is touching player one, then we want to change direction and move. So there's a lot of different ways to do a lot of these steps. So if you find a better way, that's totally fine. I was just playing around with this and kind of came up with it, and it worked. So I think that's fine that way. So I'm going to just show you guys what I did. So if it's touching player one, we want it to do something. We want to change direction. So we go up to motion, and you can see point in direction. So it can take a direction, and that could change it by 90 degrees. So let's see what happens there. Let's just play around with it here when it comes all the way back. Okay, so here it comes. What's going to happen? So that just basically turns it into 90 degrees. So it's going to always bounce back and forth like that because we're defining the number of degrees, which is left and right. So it's getting us close, but 90 degrees is not going to work right. I mean, we could do 45 and see what happens. Let's give this one a try. But that's always going to have it bounce off kind of at that 45-degree angle. So that's not quite right either. We want it to be a little bit more dynamic than that. So I'm going to use an operator, and I'm going to do a minus and put that in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to say whatever the direction it is that it's currently moving, we want it to subtract 90 from it. So we want to kind of have it bounce in the opposite direction. So what I'm going to do is under motion, sorry, my dogs are upset that somebody's outside. But I'm going to move direction into here. And I'm also going to change that to 90 on this side. So now, whatever direction the ball is going, it's going to take that angle and subtract 90 from it and kind of bounce it the other direction. But we want it to then keep moving, so we'll have it move another 10 steps. So just add some variation. So let's see what that does. So it moves, keeps bouncing around the screen. It's going to hit the paddle. Look at that. It's going a different direction. Notice it's not ever hitting in at the same angle, so it's going to change. I know there's like a little, almost like a double bounce in the way it turns. Sometimes, not every time, but that is just kind of a little bug that I haven't really took the time to work out yet. But this still works just fine. Let's see. You can see how the game is starting to really, take some shape. And I am controlling it successfully with my left-hand paddle. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to right-click and duplicate our player 1 and create a player 2. It's going to be a separate if statement though. So we want to put it right underneath. And so if it's touching player 2, we're going to have it do the same thing. It's going to point in a new direction and have it move 10 steps. So let's try this one out. We're going to play, control both of them this time. Okay, it's bouncing off. And now it's going back and forth across the screen and bounces off. One of the things that you notice though is if it hits the wall on either side, the game still goes on. So we have to tell the ball to actually stop and broadcast a message so that we know to stop the game and bring up the notice of who wins. So we're going to add another if statement in here down at the bottom, still inside the forever loop. So basically what this one's going to say is, well, if the ball gets too far to the right, then player 1 wins, and it's going to broadcast the message and make it show up here. So let's do that. So in order to do that, we want to set up an operator that basically says if the ball is in a position that's greater than this particular paddle, then it's going to cause something to happen. So we have to use our operators, and we can see that we have greater than and less than as options in here. So we're going to use greater than first. So if what is greater than? Well, we want to choose the X position, or the left and right movement of the ball. So we go to our movement, our motion, and we have our X position. So if the X position of the ball, its left and right, is greater than a certain amount. So say if we move it over to here, so if it gets past it and is touching the wall over here, so 222. So if the X position is greater than 222, then that means the game is basically going to be over. And so we're going to have it broadcast, which is under events. So we broadcast. It already remembers player 1 has won. So if it gets over here, player 1 wins. And then what we wanted to do is to just stop the game. It just freezes everything. And so to do that, we're going to go to control, and there's a stop all option right there. So basically this is saying if the ball gets too far to the right, then it's going to say player 1 wins and the game is over. So let's do that. I'm going to just leave the paddle on the left or on the right stationary. Maybe just move it out of the way altogether and see what happens. Kind of gave us a weird angle there. So let's try it again. That's a better angle. There we go. So it makes it to the wall, and it just sees that its position is greater, and it stops everything and shows player 1 wins. So same idea. We're going to not necessarily duplicate this, but we're going to recreate it because we're going to have to change this piece. So what I can do is I could duplicate and put it down here, but I'm going to take this part out and delete it. And so we're going to basically recreate it though. We're going to use an operator, but this time use less than. And we're going to still use the X position. So if the X position is then less than this value over here, so if we move this over, so if it's minus 222, that's about what it was before. So something like that. So it's minus 222. So if it's too far to the left, then player 2 has won, and we want everything to stop. So let's see how that one works. So I'm going to move this just out of the way. And that should have done it for us there. Let's see. So this is part of the whole deal. It's like there may be some bugs to the system here. So let's see what's happening. So the X position is less than 222. Maybe it doesn't get all the way over there. So maybe we change it to minus 220. Then player 2 is 1. Because maybe the way it bounces off, it only goes to like there, minus 222 is farther over. So let's see. Excellent. So yeah, it was just I was a little too sensitive there. So now when we play the game, everything should be working now. So it bounces off of these. We can play back and forth. Just caught it in time, but didn't quite catch it there. So player 2 won that time. Maybe the ball's moving a little too slow. So maybe we set it to 20. And we change these movements to 20 as well. And we try again. Let's see. Make it a little more challenging. Much more challenging that time too. Actually, it might be too fast. So let's change it to 15. And we'll try it one more time. That was a weird angle that it bounced though. So it's one of the downfalls though of having the angles choose randomly, because it could mean that it gets a little bit slow at first. But I think I like 10 steps for round 1 at least. I mean, if we're going to create multiple rounds, that's one thing. Oh, that's 150 steps. So I had it an unfair advantage right there from the start. But that's the code. I mean, this is all the code you need to get it to work the way that we've been playing. All the pieces now move, and it makes for a very playable game. I think I bumped it there, so I moved it. But let's see what happens. Just going to have it go over here. So player 2 won. And that's that. Today, what I'm going to have you guys do is I'm going to record, see if this recorded well. And if so, I'm going to post this. Otherwise, I'll record a session basically walking through this one more time. And I'm going to put that into Google Classroom for you as a reference. What your assignment is for this week is to essentially build another game and post that into our studio, which I'll show you how to do before we're done. And if you're just starting out with Scratch and you're still trying to figure all this stuff out, you can take the video that I'm going to be posting and follow it step by step and create your own variation on Pong like this. You can use different backdrops, different size, and different colors for the paddles and the ball. You could even introduce 2 balls in there and have essentially the same code in both, and that could make things interesting. Let's see what that does. I'm going to duplicate have ball 2, and let's play that. It's going to get really interesting. Adding a lot of challenge, and obviously it's going to make things more crazy. So I'm going to just get rid of that one. So come up with your own variation on it, give it its own look and feel. I haven't really tried to see what would happen if the sprite for the paddles wasn't a rectangle. It might introduce a new level of challenge if they're zigzagged or a different shape altogether. Might make it a little more interesting. So give that a try. If you're more advanced in Scratch, look for a new video. You can just do a YouTube search for, Scratch tutorials for beginners. And there's a whole bunch of cool ones in there. I'm going to find one actually for tomorrow for our Ed puzzle that you can follow along and answer some questions to. But essentially, you're going to find some sort of game, whether it's this one or another, and recreate it on your own. And because I think there might have been a few questions last week about how to turn this in, I'm going to show you here too. So first I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call this PONG PM for this class. And I'm going to go to our project page. which is basically what anybody would see if they come in and look at your project. I'm going to give it instructions that says player one is controlled by the mouse. Player two is controlled by the up and down arrows. So that way anybody that comes in here knows how to play. I don't know why it didn't carry over the title, so I'll just call it PONG, PONG PM. And I'm actually click share. That makes it public so that anybody can see it, not just you as the creator. And I'm going to go right down here to where it says add to studio. And you'll see any studios that are part of our class show up here. Now I have 4 of them because I have the 2 classes, and this is the one for our class here. So I'm going to just click our second Scratch projects and click OK. And now when I go into my classes and go into our class, give us a second, it takes a little while. At least it should. There we go. I'm going to go into our studio. Here we are, our second Scratch project studio, and then there is the assignment that I just introduced. And so you can go in there and you can look around at what other people have created and give it a try. You can play it right within here. This is actually how I will look at it and how I'll try it out so that I can then grade your projects, that sort of thing. So this is how you would turn it in. I'm just gonna let it end. And that way I can see everything that you create. And it's also a good way for the projects for the end of the year. If you want to put it in the studio, it allows your fellow students to be play testers for you, because they'll have access to play it and it gives some feedback.